Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host Rory Bryce, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Vincent Duitsch. How's it going, mate?
Hi, Rory. Yeah, I'm doing good, mate. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy you're here as well, mate. Going to be a cracking episode. How things been with you recently?
Yeah, pretty good, man. I just started my new job officially today,
Nice.
so really busy. And it's actually, apart from this, it's my cat's birthday today. He's turning 10, so celebrations
Nice.
all over. And I renewed my season ticket for the next season for FC Groningen in the second division because we were relegated this season.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, whatever division, whatever happens, it's still your club, and whatever you do, you'll be there.
You'll be there. Yeah, perfect sentiment going into this episode, I think, Vincent. Thanks very much for joining us today. For our listeners who don't know, Vincent is a friend of the project, a close friend of mine. He's a ground hopper, a fan of football history, particularly in the Netherlands, which is, of course, his native country, and a fan of all things FC Groningen, which is his favourite team, if you've not garnered by what he said earlier. But amazingly as well, and the most impressive thing about Vincent is his map, which effectively is a chart of his ground hopping adventures. It's got all of the grounds that he's ever visited on it, all the grounds that he wants to visit on it, plus some other little icons explaining like the history of different grounds that are no longer there, etc. It's really, really seriously impressive passion project and hobby that Vincent's developed over the last few years. But before we kick things off properly, Vincent, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Oh, mate, that's a good question. Everything I wanted to tell you already said. So yeah, I have a great interest in history about football clubs. Like the proper football clubs, like Real Madrid and Manchester United. I don't really. I like the history, but how they are now, the modern football, I don't like that at all. So that's what I'm basically going for. And apart from that, I'm a big, like you already said, I'm a big ground hopper. I visited like 62 clubs in 14 or 15 countries right now. And that's what sparked my interest in the history, like the old clubs, the proper clubs. Like, maybe that's not a good word, but that's where my interest is. So the old grounds, basically, and how older it is, how better it is. Like, one of the best grounds I've ever been is still Daily Mount Park from Bohemians.
That's the perfect introduction to yourself and what you've told us so far. I think the stadium side of things is really, really interesting to me as well, because when you're talking about football history and having these physical remnants in part of the physical historical landscape of football and clubs is something that's really, really special. I'm quite privileged in that, of course, we've discussed it before. I've got Cathkin Park, maybe about a 40-minute drive in Glasgow, so I can go and visit that, and that's truly fantastic. So I think it's something that every football fan should aspire to do if possible, is go and visit one of these old grounds, whether it's being still used or unused. In fact, I think if it's unused, it almost adds to the mysticism of it a little bit. It's a really, really special experience, and it's something that you yourself love doing. And
just a little clarification for this map. Please visit it and let me know what you think. If you got any kind of stadium or club which you think I should visit, let me know. You know my Twitter handle, but I just say it in the podcast for the ones who's listening. My Twitter handle is @VNCTDD, just so you guys know. So if you see my map and you think, hey, he should go to this ground, just let me know. Apart from that, I'm working with color scheme. The red ones are the clubs I want to visit. The green ones are the one I have visited, and the yellow ones, sort of apart from that, it's both visited and not visited. But these are the old/lost ground which I want to go or have gone or want to visit, basically.
there we are. That's perfect. Please do go and check out Vincent's work on his Twitter. It's absolutely fantastic, and the map is really, really something special as well. As I said, it's very, very impressive. But today, Vincent is joining us because basically he's an expert in Dutch football and Dutch football history, and we're going to be covering one of probably the more well-known clubs that have become lost in the history of the football in the Netherlands. Not really a former powerhouse team, but their name's certainly recognisable from their brief European exploits and the fact that they've won a couple of titles here and there. We're going to be talking about HFC Haarlem, club from the city of Haarlem. They were formed in 1889, which makes them one of the Netherlands' oldest clubs. Now, I've been to the Netherlands a couple of times, Vincent, but I've never visited Haarlem before. I know it's pretty far away from you in Groningen. Is it a place that you're familiar with at all?
Yeah, To be honest, I've only been there once, so I'm familiar with it. But yeah,
Yeah, one of those ones. Okay, I get you. Familiar enough though, I can imagine. So yeah, they played in blue and red, which is the colours that they're most associated with, and that also gave them their nickname as well. Sorry, Vincent, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it as well. I've already probably butchered the pronunciation of HFC's name too.
they are Koninklijk, which means they are royal. So like, for example, Royal Antwerp in Dutch is Koninklijke HFC Haarlem, which means Koninklijke Haarlem Voetbalclub Haarlem.
Oh, okay, that's quite interesting. Well, thanks very much for that, mate. Yeah, fascinating. Well, the nickname in English basically translates to the Red Shorts, and they played out of the Haarlem Stadium, which I believe is still around, potentially. So, Vincent, as a groundhopper and a fan of football history and stadium history, can you tell me if that ground is still around in its original form? Is it a place that you visited before, or...?
Yes and no. Like basically, a lot of stadium is demolished. Unfortunately, one of the old stands, like the long stand, I can't remember the name of it from my lifetime. But like the long stand, like the where the expansive seats. Let's just name it that. That's still there. Unfortunately, it's all also closed because it's unsafe from what I've heard. But it's still there and. In the next season, I want to visit it. I wanted to visit it like 2 weeks ago, but then a local club of mine, Vloogstad, they could become champions against their local derby match against Be Quick 1887, 78, sorry. So I went there. So yeah, next season I will go to HFC Haarlem and see that grand.
I mean, not to spoil the story, but it's still in use, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still in use and it's not in use as well because they are still playing at the ground, but the stand is not in use. So you can't access the stand. You can see it, you can take pictures of it, but you can't access it.
Can't access it, okay. Well, it's probably a great place to see as well, and I hope you do get the chance to visit. When you do, please take some photos and send them on so we can put them on Twitter and stuff like that. Yeah, be a great stadium to see. I can imagine it probably looks quite retro and quite rustic, you know, especially if there's a stand that probably isn't in the best of repair, then, you know, be good for a good photo opportunity, but... And in 1902, you can assume the HFC Haarlem celebrated their first big success here when they won the Dutch Cup, the KNVB Cup. They beat HBS crying out 2-1. Am I right in saying that, Vincent?
It's an sports club which is basically known for cricket and hockey, and well, they do still exist actually.
Oh, I've fantastic.
Never heard of them.
Yeah,
they even have a ground which holds 1,000 capacity. So yeah,
it's pretty good going. So that was our first success. Then they won the Dutch Cup in 1902 against Kraaienoord.
And the year before actually was HBS Kraaienoord against Rap Amsterdam, which I called as the club which I thought was playing Haarlem, but they played the year before in 1901. HBS Kraaienoord against Rap, and they won 4-3.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, they loved a kind of classic cup game, didn't they? HFC Haarlem, they had quite a lot of big scoring games. 4-3 is a result that we might touch on again later on as well. And that was in the KNVB Cup, as you said, which I think roughly translates as the King's Cup or something like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, basically KNVB, Koninklijke Nederlandse Voetbalbond. So basically, KNVB is the Dutch FA, basically.
Okay.
If I'm correct, from the top of my head, the NVB was before. Yeah, I'm sure about that. But the NVB was before the KNVB. And if from the top of my head, around 1950, a lot of clubs said, "Yeah, we're going to do this different. Like we're going to go professional," and that's how the KNVB started.
Brilliant. Now, it's good to know. It's a good reference point to have as well, just for future reference and other clubs we come to be talking about. I can imagine it's probably the same as like the FA Cup and the Scottish Cup, with a lot of the early clubs who competed in it and probably aren't around anymore, sadly. But HFC Haarlem didn't reach the Dutch Cup final until 1911, and then in 1912 they won their second Dutch Cup by beating Vitesse. Next final they reached was in 1913-14, but sadly lost out to FC Dordrecht. So it's quite clear to me, based on that in the early days of football in the Netherlands, HFC Haarlem were a pretty dominant force.
They have a great stadium, by the way. I've been there last season. Yeah, I've been there with FC Groningen last season in the KNVB Beker. We won 3-0, one of the only wins we had this season. We only had 4 wins, and this was one of them.
Ooh.
it's a great stadium from like how the stadiums were in the 90s. That's how this stadium is still. So it was a trip down memory lane. I get to go, unfortunately, but fortunately as well, I get to go there again next season.
Brilliant, Dordrecht. Yeah, no, it's not a club that I'm familiar with. I must have a look at the stadium and see what it's like. Sadly, those early cup successes were about as good as it got for Haarlem, but they eventually did lift the league title in 1947, so we're skipping quite a bit forward here. It was their only league title, and this all happened before professionalism arrived in the Netherlands, wasn't it? So they must have been up there competing most, if not every season.
Yes, that's true. They're one of the first clubs in the Netherlands, and they became very big. And that's what they did.
I mean, to be fair, it seemed like they were going pretty steady. It's not like some of the other clubs or stories we'll talk about in this show where they won loads over a short period of time or kind of burned out too brightly, so to speak, and then disappeared completely. They seem to kind of cement themselves within the league and as a staple of Dutch football. And that's important too for laying down roots as a club and consolidating your fan base, and ultimately, in my opinion, is the reason that gave HFC Haarlem a bit of longevity and the reason that they lasted as long as they did, because they didn't go defunct until 2010, and that's still within living modern memory, you know.
Yeah. And it was not like it was a big club, of course, but it was not like Ajax or Feyenoord. It was a family club more.
Yeah,
and they have the tradition and the familiarity. And like Ruud Gullit played there, for example. He came out of, if I'm correct, he is a youth product of HFC.
Okay, so they had some quite well-known players and brought some prominent youth through as well. And it should be obvious anyway, but clearly they weren't a small club who came and went without much noise. Yeah,
it's a big name in the Netherlands, and mostly historical-wise, it's a really big name. So it's a shame they don't. Well, they do exist, but not in the professional league anymore. So that's a shame, but. I'm happy they still exist in this way they do right now, and you can still visit them at the ground they always played at, basically.
Oh yeah, and that's important too, especially for fans who supported them for a long time. The club and those fans can still point to, their home and their roots within the community, and to say this is where we're from, this is where it all started, and all of that kind of stuff. To be honest, that's a massive thing for a club to be able to do, even in the modern day, to be able to point to the stadium where they've played for the majority, if not all of their existence, is a rarity these days, and it's something that is really, really good for football clubs to be able to do, particularly if, like HFC Haarlem, they've fallen in hard times or dissolved or merged or don't really exist anymore. So yeah, it's a good thing that they're able to do that, and it's a good thing for their community as well. I think at this point though, a new league format was introduced with 66 clubs being divided into 11 geographic regions or something along those lines, I think it was.
The thing is, at that time you had like a lot of different divisions. Like you had the division you just said, but you had also divisions in the south of the Netherlands, in the north of the Netherlands, in the east of the Netherlands. And yeah, this is something I have to look up. I know it, the basics of it I do know, but basically like in the north where I live in Groningen, they said you guys aren't good enough to have first class football, so you guys are second class. In the west, like Amsterdam, Feyenoord, Den Haag, they said you guys are good, so you are first class. I have to look up how this exactly worked, but that's basically the basics of it. And around the 1960s, 70s, they said like, okay, we're gonna cut off a lot of clubs. Like you said, we had like 66 or 77 clubs in the beginning, and they said, okay, we're gonna demolish isn't the good word, but we're gonna eradicate some of the clubs. They're gonna go amateur, and these clubs, which we are picking as KNVB, these clubs are going to go professional. This was in like 1965, if I'm correct. Yeah, that's how it was like back then. Okay,
got you. So that's how it was then. So I suppose this could be considered the start of this closed pyramid starting to take a bit of shape. The closed pyramid, of course, which the Netherlands and football in the Netherlands has become kind of infamous for almost. Haarlem themselves were moved divisions, so it sounds like there was a few teething problems and a few changes at first, even after it was introduced. But they managed to navigate that system without making too much noise or too many issues. It did make another cup final at the end of the 1940s where they were beaten 4-3 by PSV in what sounds like a classic cup final. Of course, mentioned this earlier on, 4-3 being a favourite score of theirs in a cup final.
Yeah, but that would be a good match, I think. It would be amazing if we can get some footage from that. So if anyone has footage of this match, please let us know.
Oh yeah, please do. It'd be absolutely amazing to see something like that. I'm actually going to go and dig into that after we finish recording here. So yeah, no, that'd be absolutely phenomenal to see. But sadly, after that, HFC slipped into mediocrity over the next few decades, and the Dutch football pyramid, of course, kept changing shape, which meant that clubs kept being excluded. So there's a few being trimmed off by the sounds of things every so often. Obviously, this is something that's far more beneficial for clubs with larger fan bases and who would be considered bigger. But it was obviously a cause for concern for smaller clubs like Haarlem who didn't have the same kind of support. So I'm guessing. I mean, were the KNVB doing this with the intention of strengthening the league by getting rid of smaller clubs or clubs that they felt were watering it down a little bit, maybe?
Well, yes and no, because at the time, of course, Amsterdam and Rotterdam and Utrecht, they were the biggest cities in the country. And of course, you had clubs like Fortuna Sittard in the southern Netherlands and Rode JC. They were big with the mining companies, so they had a lot of money. And it's basically the biggest clubs at the time in the 1950s and 1960s that were the clubs which had the money. And then we're talking about Ajax, Feyenoord, PSV, Fortuna Sittard, Rode JC, NAC Breda. We're talking about those clubs.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm with you, but I mean that happens all over the world. Don't get me wrong, and it comes in bursts for many leagues. Like league reconstruction was almost kind of just part of the natural progression of football, and I do understand that. But of course, to use a really loose comparison, you then end up with stuff like the European Super League. So, I mean, I guess again, very loose comparison, maybe not the best, but it sounds like things haven't really changed. In that sense, where there's still attempts to consolidate power and money at the very top, and it does sound like that's what the KNVB were trying to do. In the case of the Netherlands, it's resulted in a pyramid which is notoriously difficult to advance through, and to be fair, in my opinion, isn't too far off what the MLS is, but it doesn't nearly get criticised as often as it should, in my opinion, for being like that.
It's not only very difficult, it's impossible. We have a closed pyramid, and the second teams of like the professional clubs, they are allowed to promote, and apart from that, no one can have a promotion.
Well, we'll certainly come back to that because it's an interesting point of discussion. But just to go back to HFC Haarlem, first of all, it took them until 1969 to finally get promoted to the new Eredivisie, which is a top flight of Dutch football, of course, where for the most part they became a bit of a yo-yo club, Vincent.
Yeah, you're basically right. And one of the biggest problems of Haarlem was because they are so close to Amsterdam, and what is the club of Amsterdam? It's Ajax. That's where most of the people were going. So one of the biggest problems was the amount of supporters they got, and of course the money, because when you're going up and down, you don't have a lot of money, of course. So
yeah, sure, that makes sense. Towards the 70s, it was more of the same for the club. They flirted with relegation for the most part, and whenever they did drop down, they bounced back up pretty much straight away. Maybe the exception a couple of seasons here and there. Then in 1981-82. Kind of came out of the blue because it was the season they shocked everyone by finishing fourth in the league and thus securing a place in European football, which at the time I think would have been the UEFA Cup. I think it was. So what was the story here, Vincent? Because this really seemed like a bolt from the blue.
Well, to be honest, it's like 11, 12, 13 years before I was born, so I basically no clue. But I think you can compare it to, and I'm sorry if you hear this noise at the background, it's my cat. He's going to the bathroom. But I think you can compare it to nowadays Union Berlin and Royal Union Saint-Gilloise, and also Royal Antwerp. They all were promoted, and they are all playing for the championship or either Champions League qualifications. I think you can kind of compare it to that. And I'm really happy you brought this up, because I also wanted to discuss Haarlem in Europe, because one of the least known stadium disasters in Europe, or maybe in the world, is the Luzhniki disaster. When Spartak Moscow played against HFC Haarlem, and on the 20th of October in 1982, and officially 66 people died.
It's tragic.
But unofficially, it was over 100 people, and of course we're talking about the former Soviet Union, and that's also the reason why it's not as known. It's a really interesting story. So if you're Dutch, or if you want to look it up, look up Spartak Moscow against HFC Haarlem stadium disaster. It's a really interesting story, and it should have be known more.
Yeah, absolutely tragic. It's one that I'll need to read up on because I can't say that I'm familiar with it at all. But you're right, the story absolutely has to be told. Absolute tragedy what happened, as is any stadium disaster. But Haarlem's European exploits got off to a good start. They advanced to the next round after beating Genk from Belgium before being put out by Spartak Moscow in the next round. But of course, that was completely overshadowed by the tragic events which followed that match. They didn't let their European duties affect domestic form though, and managed to stabilise themselves as a top half Eredivisie side. But never quite seemed to break past Ajax, Feyenoord or the PSV, who, as we know, have always been the dominant clubs in the Netherlands, haven't they?
But basically, from the beginning of the football in the Netherlands, like Ajax, they were like from the beginning they were really good. Feyenoord the same, and PSV they were a little bit later, but because they had the money and the people, that's why and the talents, that's why they became good, and they still are good. And of course, FC Twente, they've had great runs. They even became almost champions in, if I'm correct, 1966. My friends from Enschede, please correct me if I'm wrong. But around that time, they almost became champions, if I'm correct, against Ajax. But they became champions as well. And in 2010, they became champions. And now after their relegation, they're coming back. They're going for Europe now.
Brilliant stuff. Well, at least they've shown that it can be done, and you can drive a bit of a wedge between those three, the big three, if you want to call them that. Sadly for Haarlem, though, they weren't able to do so, and after slipping to mid-table, they were finally relegated again in 1990. So it seems like they passed up the opportunity, basically, to really have a go at the big three. But I guess some people would also say that they never really had a chance against them, and the whole reason, or one of the reasons that we're actually talking about them today, is that despite never really having a chance against them, they still managed to make Europe, and they still managed to have a season out of absolutely nowhere, which shocked a lot of people. So, it's one of the ones, I suppose.
It's a hard question because, like I already said, it's near to Amsterdam. At that time, we were talking about the big Ajax as people know them. My dad, he is for Ajax, for example, and he was talking about how good Ajax was in his youth. And they won back-to-back Champions League or Europa Cup won in that time, back-to-back 3 times. So how can you get big when you got such competition?
That's very true, I suppose. I mean, the conditions for it happening just don't really exist, do they? And never really existed. So yeah, just one of those things. Unfortunately, Haarlem's downward trajectory continued from there, and they pretty much became a mid to bottom table second division sides. And this is probably the point where things start to go wrong for them because, well, they slid down and they just never really got back up, did they?
And also the thing is, I'm not saying you're forgetting this, but at the time we were talking about the 90s right now. In the 80s and 90s, hooliganism in the Netherlands was really big. So football was just like in the United Kingdom, but in the UK and in the Netherlands, the hooliganism was really big. So the football wasn't attractive to go to, and the only people who went to were the diehards, so to say. So that's a small amount of people who's going, and these are the people who are going. And like your common Tom and Pam, they aren't going because the hooliganism, and that's the ramp. That's what when you seen the stadiums as they were like that with the fences and that kind of stuff, and the hooliganism and the lawlessness of it all. So.
Yeah, I suppose when you look at it from that perspective, then probably their gates and therefore the revenue would have suffered because of the hooliganism. And I mean, they never really quite recovered from there. I mean, genuinely, they didn't. They often finished bottom of the second division, but obviously couldn't get relegated because it was a closed shop. And then in 2010, they were expelled from the league because the club had simply went bankrupt and dissolved, and that was the end of that. So, which is a massive shame because they're one of the Netherlands' most historic and oldest clubs, as I mentioned earlier on, and I know it was still fairly recently. I'm not sure if this would have been on your radar in 2010, Vincent, but do you remember when this happened or any of the other details around it? Because, I say that they just kind of went bankrupt and dissolved. Was it just a case of that, or was there any other, sort of issues or factors behind that?
Yeah, I remember them going, and it was sad, of course, because just like other clubs in the Netherlands, like BV Veendam or FC Wageningen or FC Amersfoort, VSV Vlissingen, you name them, they were all gone on like 400,000 in debt. Where you have FC Barcelona or Real Madrid, they have 600 million in debt, and they're still in the Champions League. I can't fathom it. It's ridiculous, and that's basically one of the things I hate about the modern football, and that's why I like things like Haarlem, for example. The yeah, how do you say, the normalcy of it, maybe.
No, yeah, I totally get what you mean as well. And of course, it's shocking that it's happened to so many other clubs as well, and in so many other cases where they'll fall into debt, they'll be relegated, or even end up in administration, or worst case scenario, liquidating and dissolving because larger clubs haven't paid them transfer fees. And I remember reading at one point that Leeds, I think in the season they get relegated, but I could be wrong with that, we're still owed about £100 million in transfer fees from other clubs, which is absolutely crazy. But I totally agree that one of the worst things about modern football is that it's one rule for the big clubs and then one rule for everyone else. I mean, Haarlem played their last professional game in 2011 against Excelsior when they merged with an amateur team where they still play. So, it's a bit of a bittersweet ending where the club managed to stay alive, but it came at a cost. They don't have the Haarlem name anymore. Only HFC is included again. I'm not going to try and pronounce the other club's name. But that's been carried over to the new merger club. Any idea what the fans done when that happened, Vincent? Because this is something that I'm quite interested in. Did they continue supporting the new club? Do you know?
Well, I don't really know what the diehard supporters did. Of course, there are diehard supporters. I know that for a fact, and they will still go and are still going. But maybe most of them, I think they went to Ajax. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of them, and especially nowadays because the youth, they've only known Haarlem by tales from their fathers or their mothers or other older supporters. They know HFC Haarlem by name, and they maybe have seen the stadium, but yeah, they nowadays they're Ajax supporters. It's simple as that. Shame, to be honest, because I would love to see HFC Haarlem back again at a proper level. But yeah, to be honest, I don't see it happening because of how the Dutch league is structured.
So you don't see it happening at all then, no?
No, I don't see it happening. What I do hope to see happening is another team I'm not been following it, but I've been following it since I've been there last, April, since April, 7th of April, if I'm correct. I went to RBC Roosendaal, which is also a defunct club. They actually became champions in the fourth or fifth amateur division, and they go to the Eerste Klasse, as we call it, and they still have a stadium. It's called Stadion de Luiten. It's in Roosendaal. I've made friends for life. They're great guys, and I hope to see them back in second league because they really deserve it.
Well, yeah, you always want to see these smaller clubs come back as well, especially if they've fallen on hard times or they've dissolved and had to come back or rise as a Phoenix club themselves. And I think part of it is seeing the fans feel like they have their club back and have a team that represents them as well. It's a big part of the story too. You can imagine though that there's two distinct cultures between fans of clubs in the professional leagues and those in the semi-pro or amateur leagues. And I think I just wanted to ask, do you think that the closed pyramid has been a contributing factor to clubs in the Netherlands like Haarlem and like RBC, like you mentioned, coming defunct? It seems a bit unfair when you have B teams in the second tier as well, and that's something that we'll discuss briefly in a moment.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I would love to see the second teams of Ajax and PSV and Utrecht and AZ. I'd love to see them gone from the second league, and I would like clubs like Veendam or AGOVV or other clubs that are defunct now, and even from the third division right now, we have like big clubs like IJsselmeer Vogels or Kozakke Boys or Spakenburg. These clubs, you can look, one of the biggest amateur derbies in the world is actually Spakenburg against IJsselmeer Vogels. You can look it up on YouTube. It's insane. And these guys, these clubs, they will. They are a great attribution to the second league, but nowadays the funny thing is in the second league they get paid less than in the third or fourth division where they are now because let's be honest, it's all under the table. It's all black, as you say in the Netherlands. It's not like how do you say? It's not taxed, so it goes on the money goes on the table. Like when I give you 500 euros above the table, you get 300 euros and 200 euros goes to the tax. But in the third or fourth division, it goes below the table and you get the 500 cash.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, it's all very off the record and stuff like that, isn't it? And do you think they'll ever open the door to the pyramid so that clubs like Eredivisie or HFC Haarlem can make a return?
I hope so. It would be great for the Dutch pyramid because we have clubs, and with all due respect, but we have clubs like Top Os, and there isn't basically coming anyone. So maybe it's better to have a club like Spakenburg or maybe Haarlem, maybe. So that would be better, I think. With all due respect, but yeah, some clubs, I think it's better to open up the pyramid so there's a proper relegation and promotion. So the clubs that can compete will compete, and the clubs that can't compete will relegate and compete on their level. Again, with all due respect to the clubs mentioned.
No, I agree with you. And to be honest, it's hard to disagree with you. I think a few of the listeners would probably say that as well. I think B teams playing in professional pyramids is a lot of nonsense, to be honest. And they weren't introduced to Scotland a million years ago now. Probably just a few years ago, actually. But they were introduced in Tier 5, which is the Lowland League. And they're so unpopular. Of course, our pyramid was recently opened up to junior association clubs as well, but I can't imagine the SPFL ever becoming a closed shop again, even though it's still quite tough to climb through the tiers and the bottlenecks, as they get called. And I'm actually not sure how unpopular the closed pyramid is in the Netherlands with the fans, actually.
Well, most of the fans in the Netherlands, they are fine with it because it's just like how it is. And that's a lot of people in the Netherlands. They're like, oh, yeah, it's how it is. So, But a lot, me, for example, and a lot of other people who are fanatic supporters, and also most of the clubs and supporters in the second division, they absolutely despise the B teams in the second division because, for example, next season, my club, FC Groningen, we relegated. I have to go to Jong Ajax, Jong AZ, Jong PSV, and Jong Utrecht. And instead of going to the arena or to the AVA Stadion, we're going to the training grounds, which is, for example, Sportpark de Toekomst. It's horrible. And it's also one thing is one of the biggest things I despise about the B teams is when Ajax play on Saturday, for example. On Monday, the B team plays. And the young guys from the B team which haven't played, they play on Monday. However, if they play on on Friday, players from the first team, they are eligible to play in the second league for the U team. So if you're unlucky, you play against for this season they had Brian Brobby, 25 million. And 25 million is for one player is more than every club combined in the second league.
Yeah.
So in my view, it's fraud. And you can't know if you get the good young Ajax or the bad young Ajax,
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's just a lot of nonsense, to be honest, mate. The sooner they end up back in their own leagues, in my opinion, the better. Like reserve leagues or B team leagues or whatever you want to call them, or if laws are brought in to ensure that a certain amount of youth players have to be present in the starting 11 or on the bench for a game, then maybe we can finally say goodbye to B teams. I mean, in Scotland as well, it's always bring it back to Celtic because that's the best point of reference that I have, but. They've had a lot of youth players leave recently because they're complaining about player pathways. And they're like, well, we brought the B teams in, so they're always playing every week. And it's like, yeah, but these guys aren't going to be wanting to play in the fifth tier of Scotland. Do you know what I mean? They're going to be wanting to play in first team football or in the Champions League or at other clubs where they're going to get guaranteed time. So, and it just waters down those other leagues as well. It turns them into a bit of a farce. So, yeah, not a fan of B teams or young teams whatsoever. It's just a big shame that there's not an appetite for an expanded pyramid though, because obviously, as you said, it'll never affect most of the fans of the big clubs, and presumably that's why they care less about it.
Yeah, you're actually right. And also the thing is, which you are forgetting, because in the UK, of course, you have like 80 million people or more. I don't really know from the top of my head. But in the Netherlands, we only have 17 million people on a really small in a really small country. So in the north of the Netherlands, for example, where I'm from, we have Groningen, Cambuur, and Emmen. And in the north of the Netherlands, they're living like maybe 3-4 million people. A lot of these 4 million people, they don't like football at all. They don't care. So you won't see them at the football stadium. Then you have the amount of money, which gets a stadium for like 20,000 people, 30,000 people, 15,000 people. They can only fit so many people. You have a lot of persons. They support the club from a distance. Like my parents, well, like I said, my father is for Ajax. My mother is also a Groningen supporter, but she's never in the stadium, and she supports from distance, but she doesn't put money in it where I do. And yeah, that's basically it, because there are in Germany, for example, you have like 80 million people, and football is way bigger there. And also in the UK, of course, football is invented in the UK, so wherever you go in England, there's football. In the Netherlands, it's different.
All right, okay. I mean, that's actually quite surprising. I mean, you always equate the Netherlands with being this absolutely football daft country, you know, and that everyone's really into it. I know other sports, of course, are popular in the Netherlands, and that's quite reminiscent of Europe as a whole. But I thought the football culture and fandom was a lot closer to what it is in the UK.
With international, when it's international, like the Dutch national team, then everyone is, oh, we love football, we love football.
Yeah, of course, it's the national pride side of things.
With club football, they don't give a shit.
Well, it's funny because you've mentioned population quite a few times. Bear in mind, Scotland only has 6 million people or less, but in the annual football finance reports that Deloitte puts out, Scottish clubs always rank the highest in terms of matchday revenue as a percentage of annual club revenue or turnover, one of the two I think it is. So the reliance on having a consistent supporter base here is massive, and I think Scotland's one of, if not the only country in the world where like matchday revenue generated from supporters being in grounds and bums being on seats, to use that analogy, is actually the primarily source of income for a number of clubs over here. And it's massive. Do you know what I mean? It's huge for a lot of clubs, especially local community clubs, but you know, it's even more massive when you consider that clubs like Hearts and Hibs don't sell out their stadiums every week. So, you know, that's changing again, and it's on a bit of a rise, which is good to see. But it's just interesting comparing that to the Netherlands, given the significant difference in population. So, is club football just not as big as over here, or do people not with their colours and jerseys with pride, or you know, what's going on there?
You won't see them, except on match day when people are going to the stadium. Then you will see some jerseys. But apart from that, if I go outside tomorrow at like 3 p.m., I won't see anyone with the Groningen jersey. No one. Or any other football jersey.
Oh, that's wild, man. It's a complete opposite over here, to be honest. There's normally a jersey everywhere you go. Obviously, the majority of them are going to be Celtic and Rangers, but even if you go down to somewhere like Motherwell, there's going to be people with Motherwell kits cutting about. Perth at St Johnstone, you know, so just goes to show you how different the football cultures are, which, you know, just took me a little bit by surprise, I suppose, but anyway, I think that'll do us for now. This has been the story of HFC Haarlem, and I suppose a bit more of a wider discussion on the clubs who struggle in the notoriously strict Dutch football pyramid. Vincent, thank you very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, mate, and I'm sure you'll be making an appearance on the podcast again sometime soon. Of course, if there is anything that you want to speak with us about, whether it's a topic you think that we should be covering, a lost club, a former ground, a story that you want to tell, anything that's related to football history or heritage, please do get in touch. You can reach us on X at _footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. So please get in touch, even if it's just to have a wee chat. We love speaking to people about football and anything related to history. But for now, Vincent, say goodbye.
Good night.
And we'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.